I think we as human beings can't be non-polarized, right? And neutral is not necessarily the answer. I think it's just being on the same page is the answer.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Win-Win podcast. Remember about a year ago that I made a film called The Media Wars about this media Moloch force that is making us all crazy and divided? Well, today I'm speaking to someone who is actively working to solve that problem, because I'm speaking to Harleen Kaur, who is the founder of a news aggregator platform called Ground News. Ground News are trying to solve online polarization by helping people notice when their news diet might be unbalanced. And I really like this approach because instead of trying to tell people what they should read or what they should believe about a particular hot topic, they simply provide overviews of what the range of different news outlets are saying about that topic across the political spectrum. So in other words, they provide an additional meta layer of information for people to work with. So yeah, I reached out to her to have this conversation because I've personally found the platform incredibly useful, and I think it's an elegant win-winny type solution to this very insidious problem. So yeah, important stuff. Let's dig in. Harleen, thank you so much for joining me. You've got such a cool resume. You started out as an engineer at NASA working on satellites, and then you became the first female and youngest ever VP at Rolls-Royce working on their jet engines, which is like I was always obsessed with jet engines as a kid, so I really want to ask you about that. But now you are running a kind of like news aggregation site, but it's something actually much deeper than that, that seeks to reduce polarization and point out blind spots to people and try and counter media bias. So I'd love to understand how your journey took you from working in sort of the physical sciences to basically the social sciences.
Yeah, how much time we got? Just kidding.
Fairly succinct, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not been a straightforward path for sure, but yeah, it's been an exciting journey, and it's taught me a lot of things along the way. So happy to share that with you, Liv. And well, the summary of it is before I start sharing the story, the punchline is news is much harder than space. That's what I've figured out. That I don't know if you feel that, but it's a much harder problem to solve. But we are trying our best to make a difference, at least with Ground News. So yeah, as you said, I started my career. I wanted to grow up to be an astronaut. I think most kids do. It's just that some of us follow that space dream a bit further than others do. I went to school for undergrad degree in aerospace engineering, and then went over and did a master's from a place called International Space University. If you've come across it, it's in France. And regardless if you're an engineer or doctor or lawyer, you can do a program in space studies, which was quite fascinating. So we actually had astronauts on the faculty and people who have worked in space. And thanks to that degree, I got my dream job, which was working for NASA in Washington, D.C., and got to work on a program called New Horizons. It was a spacecraft that was going all the way to Pluto, and now it's going towards the outer edges of the solar system. So was pretty fascinating to be able to touch and be involved in such a project.
Well, how far along is it right now?
It is reaching almost the Kuiper belt. But yeah, I worked there as an integration and test engineer, so not a specialist in terms of on propulsion or payload. And I realized very much early on in the career, I'm kind of an overview person, the full picture person, and really enjoyed my role, just seeing everything come together, and hard work of so many people, how it comes together and just gets kind of put on a rocket and launched, which is pretty fascinating to see. But I also realized that working for an organization like NASA was very bureaucratic, and this was before the entrepreneurs of our day who are making so many advances in space. That didn't exist at that point in time, and I thought, okay, I love space, but NASA is so slow and so bureaucratic, and I can literally work on one screw for 10 years, and that screw might not even get launched. So it's not a place for me. Engineer through and through, went over to business school. I thought, okay, I should learn something about business again, just to understand how everything works. And then got hired by Rolls-Royce, the jet engine company. So I didn't know that much about aero part of the aerospace. So I had to learn a lot, and was pretty cool job. I worked as you said, VP of sales. So my job was to look after 26 airlines in Central and South Asia and sell aircraft engines to them, and look after the fleet and make sure that everything's going well.
How do you sell jet engines to airlines? Don't they kind of come part of the plane, and the airlines choose
I was gonna say
want?
that this is the funniest part of the industry. As a layperson, you don't understand. Like, imagine buying a car and opening the hood and there's no engine in there. It's like, yeah, didn't it come with the engine? No, apparently.
That's nuts.
And that's how the industry has developed. So if you are, let's say, I don't know, American Airlines, and you bought a bunch of aircrafts, you have the choice to go and buy aircraft engines separate.
Well, wait. So like there isn't like a standard engine on a 737?
There is, but you have choices. You can buy it from GE, you can buy it from Rolls-Royce. Only 2 or 3 manufacturers around the world, but still there is a choice. So it's a very fascinating industry in that sense.
I just assumed, like, if it's a Boeing, then Boeing use these engines, like they use Rolls-Royce on this and so on. But like, you can actually mix and match.
That's right. So you can say that, hey, I'm buying 737 Max, but I'm going to choose this engine on it versus Boeing versus GE versus Rolls-Royce engine on it. So I was involved in selling engines for large aircraft, wide body aircraft, so A330s or 787s, the bigger aircraft. And while I was doing this, at the same time, there was another revolution happening, which was the software revolution and the mobile revolution, and things like WhatsApp or Snapchat, or all these amazing products were hitting the market. And my turning point was, which is interesting, is WhatsApp got sold to Facebook for $19 billion. And that $19 billion, I think, if I quote this correctly, only 50 people worked at WhatsApp at that point in time, and think about the value that those 50 people created. And the value cap of Rolls-Royce at that point was $19 billion. So here's this 150-year-old British giant of an industry and company, and then it has the same market cap that these 50 people created. And again, it's not about the money, it's the value they have created.
I still can't fathom that WhatsApp was actually worth 19 billion at the time.
Coming from the space world, same as you, is like such low capital expenditure. You can build a product that gets used by people all over the world, and you don't have to have these billions of dollars to be able to make that product. And that really, really blew my mind. So yeah, it took me a long, long journey. I guess, people, right out of school or drop out of school and get on their entrepreneurial journey. But I took the walk around the block a few times before I started on my entrepreneurial journey. But I just wanted to use the same power of software, and especially mobile, and bring to people a solution for a problem that you talk about quite often, the media bias. And just wanted to create a product. To be honest, it's one of those stories you suffer from the problem so much that you want to create a product and hopefully create a product that a lot of people find value in.
So could you give a top line, because throughout this conversation, I'd love to sort of dig in to understand really what the mechanisms are that are driving polarization in the first place. But perhaps before we get into that, you could give an overview of what Ground News exactly is.
Sure. So Ground News is a news platform that is aimed at reducing media bias and increasing comprehension of news as opposed to consumption of news. I think that's the main distinction that we are really making in our minds, that, hey, we didn't want to create another news product that is just focused on how much time you spend on your screens and how much you engage with news. We wanted to create a product that, even if you spend a few minutes a day, that you can wrap your head around complex news stories and leave feeling more informed. So how ground news works, simply put, is as opposed to traditional news consumption, which is that you read one headline and then you read an article about it or watch a video about it. Instead of having just one single perspective about that news story, we'll give you loads of different perspectives, in some cases, hundreds of different perspectives. And our aim is they need to be as diverse as possible. So you can really, as a reader, compare and say, okay, this is what, pick some cliche news outlets, like this is what CNN said and this is what Fox said. And there is very different story, although the basic fundamental news event that they're reporting on is the same. That the same piece of news can be exaggerated or equivocated so much to the point that it stops resembling that it's the same news story. And what ground news does through tech is put all of that together and do it. Bias is one of the vectors that we do it along, but do it along various different scales. So you can quickly go through several news sources and say, okay, I really understand what's happening. And we do not say, hey, this is correct. There is no check marks or crosses and say, hey, this news source is correct or this news source is correct. What we are saying is, hey, this is out there. These are various perspectives available. You, misreader, put on your critical thinking hat on, and it's very much on to you why this outlet might have reported in one way versus the other. So our job is just holding up that mirror to the media.
I see. So it's sort of aggregating the meta information of which media outlets are reporting. It's taking a particular story and looking across the whole media landscape and seeing who is reporting on it and how much.
That is correct.
And then giving that information to people. I see.
That is correct. So meta coverage is definitely the only place you can get that meta coverage is ground news, to see that overall, although this news happened, how many news media outlet decided to cover it. Of course, there are various reasons why an editorial team decided not to cover a story. But our job is simply not to get into why, but it's just like, okay, this is a news story that got predominantly covered by left news sources or got predominantly covered by right news sources, and that's what we call blind spots, which you referred to earlier.
So my next question then is, how do you determine whether a news outlet is left, right, center, etc. in the first place?
Very good question. So early on, we decided, we could do some of that thinking ourselves, but if we want to remain absolutely neutral and at arm's length, and not be told that we are biased ourselves, that we want to use third-party ratings for this. So what we are doing is we are taking 3 different rating agencies and literally taking their statistical average and saying, hey, this is what these 3 are saying, and that's why, let's say, CNN is lean left or Fox is right.
Which 3 are you using?
The first one is called Adfontes Media, great company, and they're using experts to rate these media outlets. Second is called All Sides. They are using crowdsourcing, and third one is called Media Bias Fact Check, and they're using some of the technology and some crowd reporting. So we also wanted a difference in kind of the rating algorithms methods as well, to come to, again, as neutral a conclusion as possible. So we think, as an analogy, we think we are more of a Bloomberg terminal, whereas these rating agencies are like, let's say, S&Ps and Moody's. So we are not going to replace them. Our job is to be able to display this data holistically as possible.
Gotcha.
But one thing I always say to the readers is our value add is not necessarily the label. Bias scale is just for you to be able to decide, like, if I want to see the opposite end of the spectrum, and just as a more of a reading device or a map, how do I navigate through the media spectrum, or which news source should I read next if I want a totally opposing view. It's not absolutely the value that we want to provide, or not the message we want to give. It's not like, oh yeah, the main value is like CNN is left. No, it's like, hey, for this story, this is what they focused on. Compare it to the other end of the scale. It's just a scale for you. Let's go and look what, for example, if you want to go as far out on the right and see what Breitbart is saying, for example, again, then you can very, very quickly compared those two. So yeah, bias scale is one, but one of the obvious scale that we present news along is location. So right from let's say the unfortunate events in Israel and Palestine that's happening right now. So why only read CNN's or Fox's view on it? Read what is Haidt saying, what is Jerusalem Post saying, what is Al Jazeera saying, what are some of the Arabic newspapers saying, what are the Iranian newspapers saying, what did Russia say about it? And yeah, so there is a scale of geopolitical angle, and again, our job is just to assimilate that information and give it to you, and you can quickly compare that. For a couple of other scales that we have included, and we would love to include more of this metadata again to orient our users how to read news. Is one is ownership. So who owns that news source? Again, not necessarily relevant, but in some stories, let's say if it's only one conglomerate that's reporting on it. Again, it's not for us to say why are they only ones reporting on it. But hey, this is the distribution of the ownership of news sources. So, and we had to put that data together. This wasn't very widely available, and it changes so often as well in the media landscape that the ownership changes quite a bit. For example, I didn't know Carlos Slim owns a small percentage in New York Times, so Ground News displays that. And just facts like that, not saying there's not anything wrong with it, but just so there's 100% transparency. And then the last scale that we present is factuality. So not fact checking. So we are not saying, hey, this story is correct or not, but given the track record of these news sources, this news source has previously rated as mixed factuality, or their or their reporting practices have been 100% accurate, so they're high factuality. And this is again where we decided, hey, we are going to stay neutral, and we are taking third-party ratings for factuality as well. And all we're saying is we are showing a distribution.
Who are you using for that?
In addition to the rating agencies that we have for bias, we also have, for example, Wikipedia. Wikipedia also has factuality ratings to be able to do that. And to be honest, like we would love to expand more and more rating sources that can be reliable to be able to add to the collection of the rating agencies that we want to use.
So it's interesting that you try and include as broad a spectrum of news sources as possible, including the really classically extreme ones, the Breitbarts.
Yes.
Or
yes.
Who's the equivalent of Breitbart on the left? There's plenty.
Like, let's say Mother Jones.
Yeah, Mother Jones might
be.
Exactly. Or to be honest, Vice or anything like that these days.
Yes.
Are there any? Presumably, you have some boundaries of like beyond that. Okay, this doesn't count. So what is your threshold cutoff there?
Yes, good question. So we do apply that judgment. So firstly, we only let in extreme sources when the base of the news is correct. So we even let in, even going further out than Breitbart, let's say InfoWars. And that really rubs people the wrong way. Like, why are you letting in something that's so obviously been exposed as misinformation in some cases? So we don't, let's say you won't find a single news source story on Ground News and saying, hey, this has been reported by InfoWars. InfoWars will only be put as reference when the core news story is correct. And it's been put as a reference point. Hey, there are people out there who are going to read this, and this is what they're thinking, or this is the perspective that how InfoWars is displaying it, or Breitbart is displaying it, or Mother Jones or Vice is displaying it. Where we draw the line is if the news source has literally been created as a propaganda outlet. Like, let's say there are some blogs in Macedonia that were created and they have never reported anything apart from misinformation, and never a single piece of truth has. So our system goes and looks for signals like, hey, what else they have reported on? How long have they existed? Do they have social media presence? Has anybody complained about these sources? Is there an overlap between what they report and the high factuality news sources? So all of these checks and balances happen as soon as we see a news source that we don't identify, and we put it in the purgatory, and then only let it in once we are happy enough to say, okay, let's let this news source in.
What do you think ground news's likely blind spots itself are?
Not a blind spot, but a limitation. We don't create content ourselves. We are only the word aggregation. We are only showing what exists out there. So if let's say what are called news deserts that exist, or let's say um, the country's press freedom index is so low. For example, Afghanistan. We used to have quite a few news sources from Afghanistan, and now there's very little reporting coming out of Afghanistan that we can show on ground news as news sources. That is not a blind spot, but a limitation that we cannot show you what news is happening and or what reliable news to depend on from a place where the news doesn't exist. So perhaps we need to expand, and we do get a demand a lot from individual contributors like bloggers or substackers or podcast hosts who are reporting on the news from there. But yeah, we'll have to just expand beyond the text and to be able to take all this as input, which doesn't exist as of now. But yeah, it would be nice to do that.
What's Ground News's business model? Because you're not a non-profit, right? You are doing this for profit.
Yeah, our business model is also something that we decided early on that if we don't want to actually contribute to the problem and flame this media Moloch, as you call it, then we have to not be reliant on ads. We have to not hold people's attention span and not be afraid to show them what they don't agree with. So we went to a subscription model, which was a very hard decision. As you can imagine, that news subscription, there are very few people, I believe there's less than 20% Americans who pay for news today. And half of them pay for New York Times. We wanted to see if people find value. It's a freemium product. So by the way, we wanted it to be available and you can get a lot of value from ground news by using it for free, and that is the mission part of it. But if you find value in it, it's a subscription product. A lot of analysis and what you might call bells and whistles are behind a paywall, and you just pay a small subscription fee, and that's how we exist, and that's how we want to grow sustainably.
So yeah, you mentioned this idea of wanting to align the incentives and the problem with advertiser models.
Yes. Can
you explain for people why the third-party advertiser model is creating, at least my theory is that is a large part in why we have polarization as extreme as it is in the first place. But I'd love to hear whether you agree with that, and if so, why?
I 100% agree with you. Again, I am very much a media outsider. I didn't know anything, again, sharing my journey with you, that I knew nothing about news space. But having done this for the last 6-7 years, what I realized is the revenue model and not aligned incentives are one of the biggest reasons what's happened to the news industry. So the problem kind of started when news hit the internet, and the news publishers were like, "Whoa, we are not just limited to the local or classified advertisers. We can just make a lot of money through advertising and don't even need subscription. Then we can expand to the user base a lot if we just make our sites free and just monetize through advertising." So a site like CNN I would think gets like, I don't know, even 1 trillion views perhaps. I don't know, maybe I'm making that number up, but pretty high up there. So why make people pay for it? Let's just put ads on it and make money as CPM being cost per mile of advertising shown, or then click as well, and make money off that. The problem with that is you have to show people news and keep them on the platform as long as possible,
right,
for those ads to be valuable. That means that you need to start writing that people like. And what that did was that news outlets realized that, hey, I'm not going to be able to speak a very broad audience. I'm going to be able to speak to a subset of audience who agrees with what I'm typing or what I'm writing, and to have that audience fully immersed in what we are doing. Let's keep generating more and more of that content that they agree with, and let's never present an opposing opinion, because why lose these people, because we need that advertising revenue. And it's just like, even very principled news outlet, I would say, like, yes, if it's a for-profit outfit, then you just want to just have that audience that doesn't leave. That means that your job goes from, instead of informing them, just turning it into a consumption model, and similar to social media, just keep showing them more and more of news that they're interested in, and never really challenge their viewpoint of the world. So and then the further out is like clickbait, like if you are on the social media, and then the most outrageous headline is going to get that click, and then in turn get the advertising revenue. And of course, then the headline itself gets so exaggerated, and that's where what we are trying to highlight, like it doesn't even resemble that news story anymore. And so, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think the advertising model has done, or in some case, in some sense, technology has done a lot of disservice to news. And what is the function that gets rid of the most? Is it's not the distribution part, because that's making the money, and that it's not the ad sales or programmatic sales. It's actually, unfortunately, the journalists who get let go, because it's like, okay, we need to make money, but let's cut costs, so let's get rid of journalists who and that's where you get now AI generated content, for example, or whatever. The quality of content keeps decreasing, whereas the need for monetization keeps increasing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to dig into the AI thing a little bit more in a minute, but you say that you think the polarization really started when the internet came along. I would agree in part that the internet has definitely like turned up the dial. It's been a catalyst and accelerated this problem further.
Yes,
but I'm not sure whether I don't think it was the cause, because like, if the classic, if it bleeds, it leads. And
yeah, I agree with you.
Bias.
I think it's a catalyst, not a cause. I totally agree with you. It's not like we were never divided before, and suddenly just the internet divided us.
The seeds were there, and it's just it's because like old school newspapers, they had the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And so that would naturally skew the news to more negative headlines. They're more profitable, whether you were trying to do an advertising model or even if you're just selling newspapers on a street. Like the newsboy going, oh, this many people died in a train crash. Look at this. Whereas like, oh, person rescues puppy. Like, which one is going to sell more. So that's been the media have always led into that. And there was this really cool study that was done by what was his name? Kirill Lativ. I'll link it in the notes. And I talked about it in my Media Moloch video. They tried to do a sentiment analysis over the last century or so, looking at the average sentiment of like news articles and news headlines in each year. So from like 1920 or even earlier, actually, I think it went back to like mid 19th century, so like 1850 or something like that, to today. And then tracked it by the average sentiment of Wikipedia articles from historical events of that year.
I remember looking at the
and
video.
Seeing how, like, so if you look at the Wikipedia, and again, I'll try and maybe include some of these graphs in this. The Wikipedia sort of shows, okay, you can see things were pretty shitty during World War I, also pretty shitty during World War II. But since World War II, basically things have gotten more and more positive on average in terms of like the average sentiment of historical events. But then you compare that to the news media, and like certainly for the last sort of 4 or 5 decades, it's just like everything's got more and more and more negative. So just a complete misrepresentation of what actually has happened in reality. Yeah. So those seeds have been planted. And then, as you say, like the internet, the big difference with the internet is, well, it's made the competition so much more intense. But again, competition doesn't have to be bad. It could have been a race to the top, and cream rising to the top of the best quality information. Yes. But there's something about the nature of the internet, which I think something to do with allowing virality, and I'd like to talk about that more. That has basically exaggerated this decoupling between what we actually should be what's representing reality in an accurate, informed, nuanced way, and what's actually sells best is just completely gotten decoupled.
100%. There is one small other thing that happened. If you've heard of fairness doctrine, so fairness doctrine, and this is where I don't think legislation is always the right answer, but fairness doctrine was introduced by FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, in 1949. That whenever a newspaper, for example, at that time is writing about something, they are supposed to present what is a counter opinion. So basically the ground news of that time. Like
Right.
you're a journalist, it's your responsibility to provide the full picture. But it was abolished in 1987. So basically networks like again picking up CNNs and Fox Newses of the world, 1987, like Roger Ailes, if I'm correct at that time or whatever, like go ahead, just take one side of the story and exaggerate it, and that's okay. It's not your responsibility to. So I think news was more of a utility, just as you can depend on electricity or clean drinking water, and it was viewed as that. That really changed at some point in time and said, okay, no, news and entertainment, perhaps the lines could be blurred. And it's very much the burden was put on the consumer to say, hey, you if you want to get the full picture, or if you want to tell what's right or wrong, you can do it. But again, that's 1987. But now, like as you're saying, internet, it's not the problem came with internet, but got exaggerated so much because every single person can go and write what they want. And it's like not just that the water was hot or cold, it's like there's so much poisoned water, and whose job is it to tell then what flavor or what kind of whose job is it to regulate? Or again, as I said, not the regulation is not necessarily the right answer, but there was no incentive to be able to present that full picture. So yeah, I think some of the safeguards that were put in place, having been removed as well, didn't serve all of us.
Do you have any stories or examples of people who have had their worldviews, their minds changed, or their ability to sense make noticeably improved because of using your app or anything else that's sort of similar, trying to do a similar thing?
Yeah, I smile because I think that's one of the things that keeps us going, considering how hard it is, and it's entrepreneurship is such a marathon that it takes so long. We do get emails, reviews all the time that, oh my, I don't know, my father, my uncle, my aunt, my neighbor, that person was so far gone down the rabbit hole, or in some cases myself, like I was ascribing to one side of the world you use so much, and I felt so anxious, and I started using something like ground news, and it just made me feel better about what's happening in the world. And yeah, to your point, like our perception of the world being such a bad place, I feel better about it after reading ground news. And I think we do this so well, and I would like to highlight this, is because we are not passing any judgment. I think it's really important to have everybody's starting point. So regardless if you're reading Mother Jones today and going back to if you're reading InfoWars today or Breitbart today, if you come to a platform like Ground News, and if your starting point is missing, you're like, okay, these people clearly don't respect what I think today. Why should I really start with that? And just creating that environment that regardless of what your starting point is, come to Ground News. We are not going to say, hey, we are not going to shove it down your throat and say this is the right or wrong. We are just going to make it available. And what we see is in our analytics that to begin with, people come and read something like 2 or 3 their go-to news sources, and that happens during the first couple of weeks. But then within the first 3 months, the number of news sources that people are visiting on an average triples. So which is exactly what we are trying to do, is making it accessible so easily that you are almost curious and say, oh, let me just click on this one and see what they had to say. To begin with, it's mostly fueled by skepticism, and that's okay. I think that's not a bad motivation. But then what we find is it's very hard to then go back to a world of reading just one single perspective about anything. And that's kind of the challenge for our product as well. To begin with, it's very hard to train somebody to read news differently than it has been read since like Gutenberg Press, which is like one headline and one article, to come to Ground News and, whoa, all this data is being thrown at you. But once you do it and once you get used to it, it's very hard to go back to just reading one view of the world. Just going back on that, not just a personal story. We had a study that we collaborated with Duke University, and they wanted to see that if a platform like Ground News can actually change people's hearts and minds. To your point, if we have seen examples of that, and they did a study in which I believe close to 2,000 people participated. And they, how the study worked was they self-identified themselves as liberals or conservatives, and then they were given one version of story versus the other. And what people saw was just seeing the other side of the perspective. The overwhelmingly people changed their mind, and that was for us very, very encouraging and rewarding to say that just seeing the other perspective is sometimes just starting at the same page is all you need to be able to have a more meaningful conversation.
What's your average or most common demographic?
As of now, it's mostly Americans, because I think the problem, although the product is available worldwide and we have news sources from all over the world, it's mostly American, and it is mostly male. Unfortunately, I would love for more women to use a product like Ground News. Some age is somewhere around 25 to 50. So people who are open to other perspectives, open to finding out more, and want to do that in an efficient way is kind of who we are resonating with right now.
Right, because it's like this. I imagine the slightly frustrating thing is the people who are open to using Ground News are probably the people who least need it in the first place. I mean, I'm not to say that, I consider myself pretty aware of the issues of media bias. I still have, I still get gotten all the time. I still have my biases, plenty of them, and so on. And so it's definitely still beneficial for anyone to be using this kind of aggregator, this kind of meta information. But how to solve the problem, because it's the people who at the extremes who have the biggest sort of skew in the first place, and they are the least likely people to be interested in a kind of, even though, to be fair, you present the data in a very palatable way, and it is, aesthetically, it's just very, it's nice. It's like the trouble with data is it's never that sexy to the type of people who don't need this in the first place. So how do you overcome that? Like, is there a way you can GenZify it?
Very, very
or
good
boomerify
question.
it, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, it's very, very good question, and you're 100% right. I think right now we are very happy to have subscribers and people who support us, but I think these were people who are actively looking for a product like us. Right. So we are patting ourselves on the back, but at the same time, yes, we haven't even scratched the surface. There are a lot of people who could use a product like Ground News, and probably your listeners haven't heard about Ground News until today, because we're not getting out there. It's a challenge, I think, especially if you are steeped in this one way of thinking. And you're right. I think both Gen Zs and Boomers, for example, just picking on them for a second, I think Gen Zs and millennials, I saw this study, are more likely to fall for fake news, which blows my mind, because we always end up blaming the older people. Oh, they can't tell. But I think Gen Zs and millennials are more susceptible to groupthink or following individuals and just listening to hanging off words of an influencer a lot more than, let's say, a boomer might be. So yes, it is challenging. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've heard CNN all of my life, or I've read New York Times all my life. Why would I need another perspective to open up my mind? It's a challenge for us. That how do we change that? One strategy we are using is actually going and speaking to these influencers, or in some ways sponsoring these influencers as well, to talk about Ground News, because what I find is, if you can convince them, they are a great way of convincing their own audience, and we borrow their credibility to be able to reach out to their audience and say, hey, this is, I use this product and I really liked it. And I think the genuineness of that, even although it's sponsored content, really, really comes through to their followers, and say, okay, I believe in that. And I think that might be one of the strategies. And we sometimes do get questioned, oh yeah, you guys sponsored somebody who's extreme right or extreme left. Why did you do that? Because the same reason, because these people
they're actually the ones who need
a lot.
Yeah, the one
exactly.
The
In some ways, it's like vaccination.
Sense.
Like,
I mean, it's like, again, as long as you sort of got a rough balance between left and right, it's actually almost better to have some very extreme people.
100%.
That's exactly
100%.
who you need to be reaching. Well, so it's fun. You mentioned you've reached out to influencers. That's how I came to know you guys. You reached out to me and you're like, hey, Liv, can you check out this? Yes. This looks cool. Now, to be clear, I'm not being paid to do this interview. I just was like, okay, this is really cool. I haven't figured out how and if I want to monetize Win-Win yet. So I haven't taken any sponsorships yet, but that seems to be the way most people sustain their podcasts. And I mean, who knows long run, but yeah, like I was like, okay, I don't want to take any money from you guys, but I actually want to interview you because this is exactly what I've been thinking about.
And we really appreciate that. We really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, no,
thanks for giving us the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely one of the solutions to, well, at least it's a contributing part to solving this media Moloch problem. What other solutions do you think are promising? Like whether it's other platforms that are doing a similar thing to you guys, or just a completely different other approach? Is it like, because you guys are kind of an education. That's how I see you. You're basically solving this through an education standpoint, a sort of bottom up education. Are there any more like top down, whether they're like regulation solutions or something completely different that you think we should be doing more of? Both in the beginning with like, let's just focus on news media and then we can talk about social media.
I'm a bit wary of regulation because again, it's like getting the incentive right is so important, right. And legislation gets it wrong so often
all the time.
Which is why I'm wary of that. Not necessarily a media solution, but one thing that I certainly find is very important is it's in outside the screen in real life, speaking to people that you do not agree with. I think that is it's very uncomfortable for us, and I think all of us have lost that skill of to be able to. It's like that Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas party or just being able to communicate with the neighbor or in-laws or whoever it is, like that vote differently than you or have a different opinion than you, and not shy away from that conversation and have it in a very healthy format. I think it makes us very uncomfortable these days. It shouldn't, but I think that's probably the best thing that you can do, and surround yourself with those people. On social media, the ground news version of social media is go follow people that you know that you don't agree with. Go follow accounts that just give out the counterpoint to what you usually believe. And as you said, all of us are susceptible to bias, and I'm the same. Like I do this literally for a living, and I cannot say that it's like being a human being is having inherent biases, and it's just challenging them all the time.
What do you suspect your biases?
I can't say that, but I'll share with you something telling. So we have a newsletter called Burst Your Bubble. And what it does is it takes 8 different profiles of people, 6 of them Americans, like East Coast urbanite, West Coast, I think innovator, it's called a Midwestern everyman, Southern patriot. Like just think of stereotypical profiles. And we have curated news feeds based on what that profile might have read this week. And I'm surprised that although I consume so much news and I consume news on ground news every single week, there are news stories that I've completely missed with some of these profiles that didn't pass through my eyes. And they totally shocked me that I was like, wow, okay, this happened. And it didn't make it to my, although I read news on ground news, I did not read it. So I think it's important to keep challenging yourself. We do give one tool. It's not very pretty right now, but it's a step in the right direction. We are calling it my news bias. So what the tool does is it follows you not just on ground news, but you can install a browser extension. And what it does is it follows you on social media or wherever you're reading news, and it gives you your own stats. So think of it as Fitbit for news. It'll tell you that, hey, this is you are leaning one way or the other, or has it changed over time? Are you getting more balanced? Are you reading more local news or international news? Or do you end up reading, I don't know, really depressing topics like whatever all the time? Are you reading enough good news? You can adjust whatever skills that you want. And it's, again, just in the service of holding the mirror up to yourself and recognizing what your bias is.
You mentioned that it's overall, it's good to like expose yourself to things that you wouldn't normally see. And I completely agree with that. However, there was an interesting study that came out. Well, I'll link again in the show notes to an article about this idea of the paradox of polarization, which is, we hear a lot about like, the dangers of echo chambers. And I completely agree. Like, yes, if you're just reading from one particular viewpoint over and over and over, and you never hear opposing viewpoints, then you're just going to end up like basically a mindless parrot of that. And you just can't, you just have just a very incomplete worldview. However, there is some evidence that, particularly on social media, which, because of the design of the algorithms, which are, again, trying to keep people engaged, they're about engagement, keeping people online as much as possible. One of the best ways of doing that is getting people outraged and angry and essentially triggering the limbic system to kick in. And the best way to do that is to actually show them counter, like inflammatory views that are completely contra their normal beliefs. And so to trigger them and make them angry. So that is an interesting thing where that's like kind of the inverse of an echo chamber. And yet that's also making polarization worse. So my little like thesis is that you have the mainstream media or the classic news media that sort of create the echo chambers in the first place. And to an extent, certain other like old school social media sites, I think, did this. Like, I think Tumblr was very much like that. It would like send people down these like rabbit holes and that would become their whole world. But now you've got like the more modern algorithms on things like X and Facebook to an extent, and probably TikTok and so on, which in order to get engagement will sometimes show you something really, really like inflammatory. The bubbles, that splinters your echo chamber in a very uncomfortable way and then goes viral. So it's like they kind of feed into each other. You create the echo chamber and then you create something that makes as much friction as possible against that echo chamber. So I'm curious, would you agree with that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that sounds very right to me. that sounds, because I think fear or rage is such strong motivator or such strong emotions that, yes, I to drive engagement and to drive virality, I think, of course, or to drive outrage, I 100% agree with you. I think showing something so. And I think the keyword you use is inflammatory or exaggerated. It's not necessarily a very well thought through counterpoint that they're going to present it to you. They're just going to present something that is so outrageous that you're like, okay, no, I have to share this with my friends, or I have to comment about it right now. Otherwise, I'm not a good citizen if I don't do it and drive that engagement up. So no, I'm with you that. Counterpoints, I believe that, yes, that's how you start a conversation and bring everybody back to the same page. But outrage is not. It's like is not generated from counterpoints. It's just generated from inflammatory kind of material that exists out there.
Right. It's like algorithmically amplified straw manning. So it's still
that's a very eloquent way to put it. Yes.
Because the way the algorithm works, it wants the most inflammatory thing. What's the most inflammatory thing? It's actually the worst arguments of the other side that are like, will trigger you because you're like, wow, that's how dumb these people are. So it's picking the dumbest arguments of the other side and shoving them in your face, which further entrenches your existing views. So what we need the algorithms to do, and now that, and this will take us into the AI conversation, now that we actually have like LLMs that can presumably extract, or at least AI that can get an idea of tone more effectively and more accurately than before. We need something that will look for, it's a bad thing to give the worst, the straw manny stupid counter views, but it's a good thing to give the most nuanced, good faith steel man counter views. So yes. I wonder if there's, that's not really something that the legacy media can do. That's not how their platforms work. But like if I was the owner of X or a big social media platform, that would be the approach to go down. And I think that's what Elon and X are trying, at least that's what they've talked about trying to do, Do you have any ideas of how you would go about doing that? If like what are
I can tell you about
for?
our efforts to highlight some of this. So yeah, thanks to LLMs, the things that we were only humanly able to do, like with the help of LLMs, we can do that. So one thing we started doing on Ground News is just highlighting these inflammatory language. So whenever there is a word that's been inserted into a headline that is like, oh, dopey AOC did this or whatever, I don't know, Sleepy Biden, did that. But yeah, the rest of the headline is 100% accurate, and you don't even think like, oh, well, okay, this one word just changed the entire framing of the. We are using LLMs to do a couple of more things to help, and I wonder if this could inspire X or one of some of the bigger platforms that can help solve the problems. So one thing we are doing is we ingest all. We are summarizing what are the main talking points of the left, what are the main talking points of the right, and even comparing it. So let's say left focused on, I don't know, cliche. I'm just picking on a historical example. Black Lives Matters march. So the left was really focused on the importance of it and the historical event it was, or why it should happen right now or has been ignored. And right was focused on the lawlessness of it or the property damage of it or whatever. So just succinctly summarizing that and presenting it right next to each other, I think is really, really helpful. Again, so doing two opposite things. One is highlighting literally the inflammatory language. And second is just trying to make those points as succinctly as possible and say, hey, this is what these both focused on, and both are right. Right in the sense both of them are accurate, that these both things happened, that it is, the march is very important, and people need to do that, but also yes, there was property damage and there was lawlessness that the right sources pointed out. So yeah, I think if the social media platforms where majority of people and do get their news and will continue getting their news, start doing something like this, is just highlighting whenever they come across a news story where some of this is happening, I think that would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, you need some kind of like clear identifier of what the current thing is, which, to be fair, thinking on X, it's got the, on the trending, that's kind of probably the current hot topic. So see what are the top trending things that seem to be related to some kind of political thing. And then next to that, you could present the two things. Yeah, that'd be cool if that was integrated.
Yeah, the counterpoints of it. We do, again, we have no partnership with X, and we are so small at this point. We do have a browser extension that if you are, as I said, if you have installed, it follows you around, and on social media, every time you scroll across a news story, it'll tell you where the news source is, what again gives you all the metadata and shows you, by the way, there are 20 other sources that reported on it, or this is a counterpoint. So we are trying to do that in a very small scale, just for the news stories. So not necessarily if somebody has written a long opinion rant about something, we can't do that. But if it's a news story, we are doing that through our browser extension.
What are some other things that could be done on with social media platforms? So one, I mean, Jonathan Haidt is one of my favorite people to read on this topic. He's just so amazing.
Agreed.
And he gave a list of a few different things. So one is demetrifying. So, right now everything is, we're by having metrics like number of shares or number of retweets or number of likes and so on that something gets, while it's true that that's an indicator that it's showing, it's a signal that something is good at triggering people into some kind of action.
But it's not a signal of veracity.
Exactly. It's neither a signal,
right,
of veracity or of higher-mindedness or of nuance or any of those things. In fact, sometimes it's probably anti-correlated.
It triggered a reaction.
Right. And so he proposes like things like obscuring like and share numbers, so that things can actually be evaluated on their own merit. And I think that stands for some promise. But at the same time, the reason why like buttons and share buttons and retweets emerged and the number is because it gamifies it and increases, it's like a reductionist thing. And that's really what Moloch is. It's like, it's when you take a very complex concept and reduce it, oversimplify it down into a single thing, whether it's like, dollars earned and so on, and in that reduction of complexity is where you lose. It's where you get the decoupling and you end up with these like Goodhart's law type situations. So that I think has a lot of merit, but it'll come at a cost, because now again, the social media companies are in their own Moloch trap. Even if one of them does this, now they're going to be losing out to all the others that don't give a fuck. So that's the problem.
100%. Like we are a generation, or we are people who won't even watch a Netflix show without checking the ratings first. So why would we just look at a tweet or
I have to read the words and infer their meaning and judge them?
Exactly. Why would I do that? I need a signal what I should think about it.
Yeah.
Again, the critical thinking is the missing piece. We don't want to do that.
Yeah,
it's hard.
I mean, and so the second one he says, I think just seems pretty obvious to me. It's just like reducing bots or reducing the number of unverified accounts. I think that seems pretty no-brainer, given again we're in the age of generative AI and automation, and like we've seen the havoc that can be created by what was it called, the Internet Research Agency or whatever, that Russian troll farm that was. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a kind of, I
love the name Internet Research.
I know, it's like how insipid
so official.
Yeah. But whether that one, like, even if you think that one wasn't real, the point is that like people, it's the incentive is there to do this kind of thing, and it's very cheap and easy to do, so people will do it. Like that's just a pretty good rule of thumb, and anything that can reduce that is generally a good thing. That said, like there is value in having. I do think there is value in having people have at least pseudonymous accounts, but there's probably a middle ground where you don't have to make people show exactly who they are every single time, because people in oppressive regimes will never be able to speak out. But you can still have it so that you can prove that they are actually just a human being, at least for now. But again, it's a cat and mouse game because of AI.
Yeah, because it makes sense. All bots are doing are amplifying certain perspectives or certain inflammatory things, and if you stop that amplification and it's one thought as one human being, right, then of course it should be helpful. But anonymizing it still makes sense. And
then the third one is re-adding some friction, like, are you sure you actually want to post this? That one feels like a slightly icky one. Like I like how they introduced, do you want to read the article first? I think that's a nice little, I know that always gets me when I go to share something and I'm like, oh, okay, fine, yes, I'll read it. I don't want to be that person. But the trouble with when you have, as that's the thing, you'll be using an LLM, right? Or something like an inverse LLM to infer the tone of your tweet. That is already now such a loaded thing, because it's like, who designed the AI in the first place to decide whether your tweet is actually good faith or not? So that, if that can be done right, if we can truly have a perfect good faith sensing, highly wise language assessor that is an AI, great. But I am not convinced we are close to being able to do that yet, or at least. So that's another can of worms. But at the same time, if it's just a suggestion and it doesn't stop, as long as you don't get stopped from posting, that's when it gets really bad. If it's just another layer of information, then it's probably not that. That's like a kind of middle ground. So
I'm wondering if another, just on that idea, what if it converts your post into something that's more neutral and just putting forward the point, it just paraphrases it to, instead of being emotional and triggering, it's just like, oh, this is the point the person is trying to make. Let me convert it into that. Is this the point you're trying to make in a very,
so just like a suggested edit.
Suggested edit. I wonder if that's takes the emotion out of it. It turns it into this very
it could be, again, as long as it's not enforced. If it's enforced, then I hate it. And I think it's a net negative. If it's a suggestion, be like, just FYI, this is another way that you could word this. I don't think anyone will, if someone's writing a really inflammatory tweet, I think it's very unlikely that they will deliberately then change it to that, because then they lose out on the virality, and they were optimizing for virality in the first place. But just the showing, to be like, hey, just FYI, this is what your angel would write. that's not trying to be a douche.
I like that. Just your angel.
It's like right, you could almost have like the angel and devil.
Yeah.
But again, it feels that's the thing with all of these things. It's opening up also potential for abuse. At the same time, social media is so bad. I don't. Is it really making things worse? I don't know, but that's an interesting suggestion actually. Another one I like is that I haven't seen anyone really talk about. I don't want to take too much credit for it, but it was an idea I had. Was like basically the idea of a slide bar, because right now everything's so binary. Like I either like the thing or I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. There's no granularity. I'm like, actually, I really agree with this, or actually, I'm not that sure. I'm like sort of 7 out of 10. It's just like a little slide bar where you can kind of rate something instead of 1 or 0. You've got 0, 1 to 10, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or the fact, again, going back to X, I don't want to keep picking on that, but it's just the one I spend the most time on. The fact that there's only a like button, but there's not a dislike button, is what's actually driving a lot of language to be negative sentiment. Because the only outlet, when people see something they don't like or disagree with, their only outlet...
That's fascinating, yeah.
Their only outlet is to either quote tweet it and say, this is fucking stupid, which in many ways is then amplifying it and creating yet more friction, or to comment being like, this is wrong for this reason, X, Y, Z, And while I think it's, again, if people were just doing that in good faith, in constructive, nice ways, then that's okay. But most of the time people don't. They don't have time for it. They just want to tell you that you're a moron or that this is stupid and dunk on it. And so the only outlet for disagreement right now is by adding more words. So no wonder the ratio of words on a platform like X is like so heavily skewed to you're wrong, fuck you, or, negativity as opposed to positivity, because there is no other way of getting that disagreement out by just pressing a button. Whereas you can just like a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, that's another like food for thought. That was Igor, my partner's idea.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, I never thought about that because, they keep talking about, like, everybody talks about how dislike button has just never existed, not to add negativity. But yeah, you're right. It's just been replaced by loads of words that are a lot more hurtful and adding to the noise. So that makes sense. One idea we have toyed with and we think we can make work is as soon as you see somebody write that you don't agree with, that you can call us whatever tool bot, or we want to call ground use bot, and it presents a counter opinion and a well thought through one. So you can just because nobody wants to take the time, as I was saying, to think about what exactly the counter opinion is, apart from saying, yeah, as you're saying, you are a moron. Like, hey, this is why, not you're a moron, but this is why I don't agree with you. If we can just call ground use, and it just presents the counter argument that you're satisfied putting forward. So I think that might be powerful enough.
Do you think we can ever be truly non-polarized all the while that we're going to be communicating through digital screens without faces?
I don't think so, because I think we as human beings can't be non-polarized, right? And I think going back to, it's not that, and neutral is not necessarily the answer. I think it's just being on the same page is the answer. And we are human beings, and I think innovation and progress comes from not agreeing with each other. And I at least I believe that. And that's but it's just having those arguments in a format which is helping us drawing forward and actually solve the problems, as opposed to just shouting at each other and getting madder at each other and hating each other, is I think what the problem is. And regardless if it's digital screen or without it, and without it is just, as I said, like, we're just avoiding it, at least through screens that we are communicating, just not in a very efficient manner.
What would, in your mind, a truly win-win media industry actually look like?
Truly win-win media industry is that where news where money can flow to the newsrooms, journalists can write and report on news that they believe is important. It's not driven by ads are just a mechanism. It's not driven by emotions that are not positive, like hate or fear or so. They actually can go back to writing that this is good journalism, and people read that and feel informed. And if there are arguments, they are presented in a thoughtful format as opposed to, again, just pointing fingers at each other. I think that would be win-win. And at least we have taken the subscription revenue, and I think it's a very hard road to take. But if everybody goes back to finding value in news, I don't see why people would not want to pay for news again. Like, why do we have to rely on ad? Everybody, at least when I grew up, and their family used to pay for a newspaper, like that revenue existed. Why can't it go back to being that households that where we pay for that news and get high quality news? And it's not that, oh yeah, I'm okay paying for my streaming subscription, but news, well, why should I pay for that? Like, that's not an outrageous suggestion anymore.
I would like to think so. At the same time, it's very hard, and again, because of the Moloch dynamic, it's very hard to make people go back to make, especially the younger generation who have, from their perspective, they've never had to pay for news. You're now making them pay for something from in their mind they've never had to pay for before. That's a very hard thing to sell to people. And again, anyone who then doesn't do it, it's going to have the competitive advantage.
As I say, there's no such thing as free lunch, right? Sure, you're getting your news free, but where is it coming from and what is it doing? So it is, yes, you're listening to some influencers and yeah, giving benefit of doubt that a lot of influencers are doing, let's say, God's work and telling the right things. But there are a lot out there that might not be, or might have an agenda, or might be mouthpieces of certain agencies or governments or whatever it is. Like, then are you doing your research, telling them apart? No, you don't have time to do that, or you don't have tools to do that. I think, unfortunately, people might have, and we have been learning through hard knocks, and might go, like, we might have to have a few more hard knocks till we learn that, yeah, we need to have reliable information, and for that you have to pay. And yeah, it's not easy, and maybe I'm being idealistic, but I'll give you an example. One of the highest revenue days for ground news was January 7th, 2021, because there was a day after the insurrection, and people were like, whoa, what happened? There was information chaos. And certainly I did not, I can't make sense out of this, or this is not what the country I live in, or this is not my reality. And people actively look for solutions. And I think then they come and open their wallets and say, yeah, it's not like you don't have to pay a lot. Like, I'm not saying, again, we are the solutions. Like, your local newspaper probably doesn't cost that much. Another problem is with industry is, just like every single industry goes through this. Like, if you want to read paid news, you have to subscribe to 30 different things.
Right.
Again, the burden has been put on consumers. Like, oh yeah, I have to pay for a local newspaper, plus I have to pay for, I don't know, Wall Street Journal, plus I have to pay for 3 athletic, well, because I like sports. The burden has been put on the consumer again. So I think the industry has to go through the change where the burden gets taken away from the consumer. You have all the tools, you have reliable information, but you only have a single payment to make. Going back to the model of, like, hey, my family got one newspaper, I read it front to back, and that's all the information I needed. I don't need to. So I think, yeah, the industry is going to go through that consolidation the same way it went through streaming, and unfortunately, on the other end, there's still fragmentation. But yeah, pay one subscription for news, one subscription for music, one subscription for video, and I think that's the world that we can go live in if we can deliver enough value to do that.
And provided that subscription of news has a broad enough range of organizations.
And we would love to be one of those, a platform that provides that. I think if we can convince news outlets to join us and deliver that paywall-free, ad-free news, why can't you just have a good platform? And that's what we wanted it to be, a starting point. Like, Spotify won that race not because it had all the content. Yes, it got all the content, but it was a great product to use. The tech was great. There was no lags in streaming, or you could make the playlist. It's the features why it won the race. And then content was important, but added on. So I think if we make good enough news platform and then add enough ad-free, paywall-free news, then I think we have a winner product, which I would love to work towards.
Yeah, because would you get the because the broader the political spectrum of outlets that is included within that one paid-for package, the
Yes.
more ideologically robust, provided again, like within reason. You don't want to be
100%,
crazy,
right? It has,
but you would want the CNNs and the Fox Newses in the same thing.
I personally wouldn't build a product that doesn't have that robustness.
Yes. Would they agree to be under the same umbrella is the thing. And how do you incentivize them to do that? Maybe if you say, look, guys, you can get everyone to start paying for your news again. You can move away from this awful ad thing.
The win-win is like they get more revenue. Like, look, whoever's the CNN viewer or whoever's the Fox News viewer or the reader, whatever, they already have it. Like here, we can bring you additional people who don't necessarily go to CNN as the main source, or Fox News as the news source, and we're giving you revenue from that. So why won't you join us for that additional revenue share, market share? And that's how we want to view ourselves, as the multiplier, that we take people to more news sources than they would have ever gone by themselves. Like, sure, if you would have never clicked on Breitbart yourself or never clicked on Mother Jones yourself, we are going to take you there and give you a revenue to them. So why won't you join us? Anyway, I think we are still very small, and I don't know how big we have to be to be able to have these conversations with these big media publisher companies. But I hope that there is enough financial incentive for them to be able to say, hey, we are dying otherwise, and we are actually not funding our newsrooms enough, or not paying good quality journalists enough. So let's at least try out some other models in addition to what we are doing.
So there we go. Huge thank you to Harleen for this conversation, and to you guys for tuning in. Do check out Ground News. They have a cool website. They also have this like extension thing you can add to your browser. I personally end up using it the most on like Instagram, where they just always have, whenever there's a big news event, you can just quickly swipe through and see what the left, the right, the center, etc. are all saying about it. Also, if you didn't get around to watching my Media Moloch film, The Media Wars, that I mentioned at the top of this episode, that is linked below. I highly recommend it. I dress up as I do acting. It's a whole thing. But yeah, thank you again. If you enjoyed this, please tell your friends, and I will see you next time.